As I reflect back on this man, I think about four particular words. I think about expectations, I think about integrity, I think about passion, and I think about innovation. And if you think about the different ways that he moved, not only with charters, but in the Minnesota education environment, I think all of those things were important. He had expectations not just for kids, high expectations, he had high expectations for schools. And he had enormous integrity in the sense that he was willing to acknowledge that some charters were not doing a good job. And I think one of the reasons that he was so effective at the legislature with across the political spectrum was that people respected the fact that he would acknowledge that there were things that needed to be improved. And in fact, he came up with suggestions about ways to improve them.
His incredible encyclopedic knowledge of education laws and even broader laws in society. And he could pop up with very specific laws in reference to whatever they were talking about in the committee and testify. And I'm like, how do you do that? And it was all up in his head, all up in his head. Absolute brainiac on education law. And I think he was driven by what was in his heart. I think he genuinely, really deeply cared for kids and what they came through with and what their opportunities were as they went off into the future.
I know his heart, and I know it was always meant with the best interest of what was going forward in mind. So he's a complicated guy, and the thread that wove his quilt was of many colors. That's the best way I can put it. Eugene, I think I've told you this before, people loved him or hated him. And in some cases, the hate was because you loved him so much. And you love to hate him or you hate to love him. It was just, what a guy.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, he knew how to get the job done. You didn't have somebody with that kind of personality, with that kind of tenacity, with that willingness to kind of, to take something on that most people wouldn't take on and to prove people wrong. We wouldn't be sitting here talking about this organization, 20 years later.
Max really was in need of new leadership, and it was stumbling. There were some out-of-state entities that had come in and taken hundreds of thousands of dollars and poor management, poor schools, etc. Eugene cleaned that up in overnight almost. He recognized that we needed better systems for approving schools, and especially the oversight of schools, but even more so the early financing of schools. There really wasn't any until the federal money came. Then he really worked with the Department of Education so that as soon as a school was approved by the authorizer, and then of course it was called a sponsor at that time, and ultimately by the department, a couple $100,000 almost automatically flowed to that school, and Eugene was very instrumental in getting that to happen.
Yeah, I just think Eugene's legacy is he's just an amazing, and wonderful person, and will always be synonymous with his work, but his whole life was not his work. The reason his work was able to be so impactful for charter schools was because he cared about people. He cared about the people that he worked with. He knew the job of being a charter school leader was difficult. He was that voice on the other end of the phone, usually when you were having a crisis. And there was a lot of humility there that I think some people didn't always see in Eugene. People thought he came off with more, bravado, or he was very set in his ways. And I think below the surface there was a lot of humility. There was a lot of understanding about how hard the job was. And I think once you got to that, just below the surface, it was really there that what a special person he was.
Really good at relating to his board, having a proper relationship, having proper roles for the board versus the staff. But in terms of the big picture, the relative stability and survivability of chartering in Minnesota and maintaining through all of the travail that's gone on nationally, the bipartisan support for charter schools in Minnesota. I think that's a pretty impressive legacy.
I would say he's left Minnesota and left America with arguably the best chartering program in the country. I hadn't understood until later on that Eugene had a status that probably unique in the country, where he sat with the heads of the other major units in public education in the commissioners' meetings. He left a charter sector that was itself innovative with respect to the way students learned and the way teachers worked. You can see the innovations now moving over into the district sector. But I guess the other legacy I'd say is he left the charter sector pretty well prepared to deal with what's coming.
Well, look at Max right now. Max is a functioning organization, which it wasn't when he became director. I mean, he set up things that Max needed to do to satisfy the charter community, which is a really diverse community.
We know that as we look at the history of the charter movement, it was a series of compromises, and you had to bring people to cross the aisle to find kind of compromises. And I think that one of the things he was excellent at, and you could see this when all the tributes came pouring out for him after his passing, that they came from all aspects and all sides of the political divide and spectrum of the impact that he made, because he could work with people, regardless of their, political stances or just as long as he could see that there was a opportunity to collaborate for the betterment of charter schools and, most importantly, the students that they served. And I think that was part of Eugene's superpower, is that he could vehemently disagree with somebody and let you know and bring the facts behind it, and at the same time still find ways to continue to work with you and continue to have the relationships.
When you think back on the number of sessions that he went through legislatively, which was so important to him, the law changes for charter schools, the legislative changes for charter schools, even the silliest little MDE changes, he was a tiger and a bulldog on getting that right and making sure it was to the benefit of the schools. Because he was also the first voice to say, not every charter school is the same. He was just a huge voice. He did it all. And it mattered so much to him. And for a long time, we didn't have the staff in the Max office to support most of what he was doing, so he truly did do it all.
Inquisitive, interested, curious, passionate, committed, hardworking, and he had a lot of integrity. So I think it's up to all of us to recognize the gifts, the talents, the insights that he gave to us and say, okay, now it's our turn. It's our time to follow up on these very important instincts.
When I started in this position 17 years ago, we did not have enough money to make it through a half a year because of the way the organization had been operating. And so I'm really quite proud we've gotten to the point that we are sustainable actually in a far different place than we've ever been.